update exactly what the scenario is when it comes to the situation there. Just with regards to how things are faring thus far, this is very quickly in the Eastern Cape, where we have 9.5% of votes having been counted on that front. The ANC sitting at 70, just around 71% with regards to support on that front. The DA still the opposition for now anyway with regards to those votes. 455 voting stations out of the 4,791 have indeed been counting. Look at that, a voter turnout of 59.12%. Not the kind of numbers we certainly want to see when it comes to that picture. On the national front, 63% with regards to the voter turnout there. Again, the sentiment that we're not trying to push out, of course, across the country. Headed off to Limpopo as well, then the ANC has still maintains some sort of stranglehold with regards to Limpopo, but the likes of the EFF, of course, do come into the fore here, and it is a stronghold for some parties as well. So the EFF will perhaps filter through here in some way, with 1.5% of the votes then having been counted. 56.2% of the support belongs to the ANC when it comes to Limpopo province. We'll continue to update you, of course, across the morning as well as we continue to get the results coming in. But for now, I'm joined by two guests as well in our studio here at The Rock. Dr. Pravesh Deba from the CSIR as we unpack a whole lot more of that data, and Michael O'Donovan, political analyst as well, joining us as we get into the next session as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time this morning. It's a good morning to indeed be able to at least have something interesting to talk about, and this is certainly an interesting one thus far. I'll get your thoughts as well, Mr. Donovan, O'Donovan, just with regards to how things have fared, how you've seen things with regards to the picture just around the country. And even though we've had a few issues here and there, would you say that we've had a free and fair election and things have gone on without a hitch?
Well, not exactly without a hitch, but it's gone off as well as anybody could expect. There will inevitably be some hiccups here and there, and nothing seemed to be really substantial. So I trust that the IEC will be able to sort out the complaints that have been lodged, and I don't think any of the complaints indicate any material impact on the election. And Mr. Deba, do you think then we've, looking at the data you've come up with and seen and things as they've progressed, it kind of does tell a holistic picture? It's not anything too major that we perhaps have seen come through when it comes to perhaps interferences, voting stations perhaps in some areas not necessarily opening. It doesn't change too much when it comes to the data points.
From what we can see thus far, it doesn't. It's very difficult to say from the data side, but I wouldn't say come to a conclusion that there has been any issues.
With regards to some of those results, yes, we're getting a few coming through with regards to that. Any more sort of updates that you're seeing from the CSIR side with regards to, whether it be regions, whether it be voting districts as well? What is it that you're getting?
As you know, the CSR is doing the predictions, so we are predicting what the final outcome would be, and we are continuously updating these predictions. Now, thus far, we have round about just over 5% of the voting districts that have been declared. Usually we are more confident when we get to somewhere between 5 to 10% of the voting districts being declared. But I think even at this stage, with 5% of the voting districts being declared, we can in fact say what the final outcome would be with a certain margin of error. So if we look at what it is currently standing at a national level with the ANC, we are looking at the ANC ending up around about 55%, plus minus 2 or 3%. With the DA, we are currently looking at the DA ending up with a predicted amount of 22%, and the EFF around about 10%. Now we have to be very careful, because the one thing here is that the percentage for Gauteng is extremely low.
Yeah.
And that also would have an impact on the results as well. When it comes to the the predicted turnout, we are looking at about 61% at this moment. That is what we are estimating. But again, we have to be careful. It's still very early stages, and we will give more updates at a later stage.
How much does that hurt, Michael O'Donovan, with regards to just having a voter turnout, if it is anywhere between 60% and 70%, which is of course still lower than the 74% we saw in the 2014 general election? That's bound to send a message to some of the political parties.
Well, people have been talking about voter apathy, and I think that unfortunately places the focus in the wrong place. The focus should actually be on the political parties. Voters feel a massive sense of alienation. They have a lack of enthusiasm about the choices before them. And if these projections are correct, there is 14%, up to 40% people decide, I'm not going to vote this time, compared to the last national election. There's a massive decline in voter participation, and it's indictment on the choices that we've been presented with. People have simply lost that conviction.
Do you think the political parties, though, will hear and heed the call in this context then? Do you think that this would send out that clear message, and that they would actually begin to say, actually, yes, we do need to change the way we're doing things?
Well, at one level, the CSR projections, particularly for the ANC, is simply indicating that they've continued with the downward trend that they've been experiencing for the past 20 years. And if it continues once more, they will no longer have that majority. And if they don't get a message now that they need to be accountable to the electorate rather than to the internal dynamics, then I'm afraid that they're in for a very hard time.
One would have thought that they would have gotten the message in 2016 already. I mean, they lost 3 major metros. Things began, to seem very, very difficult for them, and yet here we are.
And yet nothing really changed until perhaps Cyril Ramaphosa became president. He promptly promised a new dawn, and we are still waiting for that light on the horizon.
Do you think the ANC is in what I'm going to deem very loosely as the last chance saloon?
Absolutely. They've got a massive internal problem, which they don't seem to be able to solve. And that can only be to the detriment of that party. I'm not sure that the GA and the EFF are actually doing any better, mind you. But each of these parties have their own. They've all been inordinately inward-looking. They've been looking at the internal dynamics, their own issues, and really treated the electorate as somebody that would simply do their duty and vote for them. And so to a certain extent, if the voter turnout is as low as it seems, there can be no clearer message there can be no clearer wake-up call.
We really hope they actually see it then. Dr. Debo, earlier on I had, a look just with regards to social media, things where people were saying, things people were, able to update with regards to how it's faring for them. And one of the hashtags there was, after I vote, I would like, or things they would like to see happening after. Are you still getting the sentiment that people are still trying to perhaps offer their demands, shall we call it that, from government through Twitter? And yes, we continuously say that it's not the be-all and end-all. Twitter doesn't necessarily represent the entire country, but of those that are on it, these are their thoughts.
Well, when you're looking at Twitter, obviously there's a lot of people that is making certain comments and things like that. So, I would say to a certain degree it does reflect their thoughts.
And I suppose the difficulty then becomes with regards to these voting stations and just where the numbers then are coming from, people look to how you've treated them over the last 5 years. And this is clearly evidence of how they've been treated, right?
I would not be able to comment on that.
Okay, Michael, then if you were to take on what the mantle is right now, for example, if the DA was to look at itself right now and see where they stand, even at present, do you think they should be happy thus far? And I'll go back to these numbers here and the board exactly and just go to a national level here and just say they're sitting currently at 30.68. Of course, we'll always say very, very early, but 6.63% of votes done, 30.68. That's a really good number for them.
That's a really good number, but if you look at the map, it becomes quite evident that the vast majority of the stations that have reported are rural.
Yeah.
There are precious few stations from the metropolitan areas. And if the DA has any support base, it's really going to be the metropolitan areas. And following on 2016, they should have been able to draw upon their status in running Johannesburg, Tshwane, Cape Town, and for a small limited period Nelson Mandela. And that should stand them in good stead, unless they did not live up to their expectations.
Yeah.
And we're going to find out quite soon when the metropolitan areas come in.
Will they give it a fair chance, though? And what I mean by that is that you had, for example, the African National Congress ruling sort of the other areas, the other metropolitan areas, for a much longer time. We've given the DA, for example, since 2016 till now, it was August 2016 if I'm not mistaken, so we've barely given them 3 years in total to show what it is that they're capable of doing.
It's a very short period. But related to the alienation that many voters or potential voters feel is the need for haste, the need for differences to be seen. So the continuity in the metropolitan areas between the DA administration and the previous ANC administration is the defining feature. Things have stayed the same rather than changed.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be to the DA's detriment in the metropolitan areas.
Sure. So you see that number weakening or strengthening perhaps?
The 30%.
Yeah.
Certainly, I certainly see it weakening pretty much in line with Provincial's forecast.
Yeah, so right through to around 22% or so, if not perhaps even, give or take 1 or 2% right there, Dr. Deba. As the CSIR, perhaps any other sentiments and views that you guys have noticed perhaps then from the results?
We also do the provincial results as well.
Yeah.
And with the amount of data that has come in, it is very difficult to actually come to much conclusions or to decide on or to give actual values. But I think if we look at the Northern Cape, we can say that the ANC will have majority power in the Northern Cape, but it would be reduced compared to the previous national elections.
Yeah, I'm interested as well in Limpopo, if perhaps you have any sort of forecasts or thoughts with regards to how things may fare on that front. Of course, the EFF wants to try and pull as much as possible from that as well. They'll probably try to do the same in the Northwest and the likes as well. But the maintenance of the ANC in that area is perhaps going to still be there. Is it going to be as high perhaps as the past? Does that drop?
For Limpopo, unfortunately, the amount of data that we currently have is not sufficient for us to
give a clear indication as to.
But I'm pretty certain that at a little later stage this morning we'll be able to make some comments on Limpopo and the other provinces as well.
Of course, we do continue to give you note that it is very early stages. 6.63% of votes having been completed in terms of counting as well there. 1,520 voting districts completed there of the 22,900 125. Voter turnout there at 63.06%. Spoiled votes sitting at 5,758. We're hoping that that number doesn't climb too much with regards to that. We are beginning to see some color come out of the map over there, but the heavy municipalities, the regions that have all the massive numbers, of course, those haven't necessarily come through. And that might be a clear indication as to where things stand. But for now, as you can see there, the ANC sitting with a total support of 50.79%, 30.68% for the Democratic Alliance, the EFF sitting at 6.52% with regards to that number. Michael O'Donovan, 4.44% for the VF Plus. For now, yes, we've maintained and we've said it before. For now, that number is still good for them.
The number is very good. Well, that number is okay for them, given that most of the reporting districts are rural.
Yeah.
But that said, in numerous by-elections running up to this, the Freedom Front did inordinately well. For example, in places where they contested against a DA share of votes dropped, while the Freedom Front Plus, in some instances, got more than 20% of the votes cast. Now, by-elections are a very poor indication of national trends, but the Freedom Front Plus was able to get more people to vote for them in the by-elections than voted for them in the municipal elections. So they seem to have far greater traction. They're still a minnow in this regard.
Yeah, of course.
But you can't write them off.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. And then we can talk very quickly as well about the good party there. Of course, if we talk about the rest of the parties there, we'll start off with the good party there. It seems Patricia de Lille is just completely gaining traction. And yes, fine, in the early stages, this is what it looks like. But at 1.1%, that's very good for a party that's just come out less than 8 months ago.
Absolutely. And she's at, as far as I can tell, she's at a very low media profile.
Yeah.
So she's doing inordinately well. Got to bear in mind that the results that we've been seeing have been skewed towards rural areas, plus to that southwest corner of the country, where Patricia de Lille's would have got more votes. So I'm not sure that percentage is going to hold. But I think what we need to look for is, can they get to that 45,000 votes?
Yeah, where
they need to get that seat in the National Assembly.
Yeah, that'll be quite interesting. Of course, my question becomes actually, so before Patricia de Lille even joined the DA, of course she had the ID, right, the Independent Democrats. And would you say that perhaps it's those voters from back then that perhaps are making the switch then to the good party under the similar and same leadership, I suppose?
Well, they've got a lot of patience. I mean, then they'll be sticking from the ID to the DA, back to good. And look, I would assume so, but I have no evidence that is the case.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that at the same time kind of portrays a good party as a colored party.
Yeah.
Which, to a large extent, those stereotypes of the vote as a racial census has changed, and there's no future, I think, in any racially defined political party.
Yeah, it does become difficult to move forward as a party if you do align yourself particularly with just one race. Let's continue to check in on some of the political parties in the lower parts of the list at present, having had 6.63% of the votes counted. COPE there for me, very interesting, still getting 1,815. Yes, as you noted, 45,000 is perhaps how much you need to just start getting a seat there as well. Then, as you can clearly tell, I'll just go to the more page on this right over here, and as I said, COPE, as we said over there, at 0.41%, they're still getting the numbers, and this is despite what some may term as perhaps a collapse in the recent big parties that are sort of split. You had Ahang come to the fore, and that sort of fell by the wayside, and we'll try and find a number of, how much they're getting right now. The likes of COPE, as we mentioned there, 0.41%. But there they are, still sitting up there in some respect.
And they're one of the few parties, I think, that may have reversed that trajectory towards obscurity. South African politics is full of examples of parties that got up to 6% and then disappeared. Independent Democrats and so on.
Yeah.
And COPE will probably be the first party to almost disappear and then kind of hold on a little bit longer.
The question is, hold on for how long?
How long?
Right? And hold on to what level? Because, holding on at these levels doesn't necessarily give them a seat, and they begin to just contest. And this is where the question then comes with regards to whether having as many political parties necessarily gives, especially on the general and the national election vote, actually gives the right sentiment for people on the ground to say we are actually going to be heard if your vote doesn't necessarily go to National Assembly.
For the voter, there's actually there was a three-way contest yesterday.
Yeah.
They could vote for their preferred party, they could defect to somebody else, or they could abstain. And the early indications are that people rather abstain. They stay away and not vote rather than defect to another party.
Sure.
So the disillusionment with the three main parties could very well have translated into support for these 45 other parties on the national list and 75 odd parties on the provincial list. And we might still see a resurgence in some support for smaller parties. And that's where the question then comes, if these small parties don't get a seat, did you waste your vote?
Yeah. Sure. Well, there we go. There is Ahang, of course, as we are trying to find that for you, of course, then. Ahang sitting on 0.09% currently at 400 votes, with around 6.63% of the votes having been counted thus far. We will continue to, of course, give you a whole lot of sentiment around what is happening with regards to the voting scenario in the country there. ANC currently still sitting at 50.79% when it comes to the voting scenario and that situation. Do continue to stay with us here, of course, here on SABC News. You can even interact with us, of course, SABC News online, and join the conversation. Hashtag SA Decides 2019 as well then. Remember that I am joined by my guest, Dr. Provincial Deba from the CSIR, and Michael Donovan, political analyst. Then, as we continue to get into how things are faring, we'll continue to have rolling coverage for you here. Some of the issues that have come out as well, Michael Donovan, has been lots of double voting and double dipping as well. Then, would you be worried about such? Would you think that the IEC is able to actually take that?
I would not worry about that at all. There have obviously been several failures on the IEC's part.
Yeah.
But for somebody to vote more than once, there has to be a failure on 3 or 4 different systems simultaneously. So the fact that you can rub your ink mark off doesn't negate what's already been stamped in your ID document.
Yes.
Doesn't negate the fact that it's already been marked off on the computer. So in order to be able to vote more than once, you have to have multiple systems failing simultaneously. It is worrying if that the IEC might be slipping up with something as simple as making the ink permanent.
Yeah.
And hopefully they can rectify that quite quickly. But as I say, they've got multiple systems.
And none of them should be failing there. Okay, well, appreciate that. For now, we will cross over to my colleague, Simphiwe Ngongwana, who's, of course, on the floor here at the Results Operations Center in Pretoria. Simphiwe, what do you have for us?
Well, Arabile, I've got so much to tell you at this hour. You know, in 1994, the only top three parties were the ANC, the IFP, and the National Party. And in subsequent years later, there was a massive fragmentation of the opposition movement. And now we only have the ANC, the EFF, and as well as the Democratic Alliance. Now, there's